The first time my wife called me half a man, she did it with a champagne glass in her hand and 200 people waiting to laugh. It was supposed to be our 15th wedding anniversary, the kind of evening people in Charleston pretended was effortless even though every white rose, every folded linen napkin, every silver-rimmed place card had been argued over for weeks. Madison had rented the upstairs ballroom of the Harbor House Hotel, the one with tall windows facing the water and chandeliers that made everyone look richer than they were. Men in navy suits stood near the bar talking about golf, mortgages, and market trends. Women in cream dresses smiled with their teeth and watched everything. I stood beside my wife under a wall of framed black and white photographs, wearing the charcoal suit she had picked because, as she put it that afternoon, it made me look less tired. I should have known then. Madison Whitaker never chose a word by accident. She waited until the room was warm with music and cocktails, until my father had come in from Raleigh and her mother had flown down from Boston, until Brandon Cole was leaning against the marble bar with that quiet little smirk he wore whenever he thought he had already won. Then she lifted her glass and tapped it once with her ring. The sound was small, bright, and final. People turned toward us. Someone lowered the music. Madison smiled the way she smiled in photographs, soft enough to seem gracious, sharp enough to draw blood if you knew her. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about 15 years of marriage, about endurance, about how some dreams change when life refuses to give you what you prayed for. I felt the room shift before she said it. I felt it in the way Brandon straightened his shoulders, in the way her sister looked down at her plate, in the way my own hand tightened around a glass of club soda I had not touched. Then Madison turned to me, placed her hand on my arm like a loving wife, and said, "Let's be honest, Daniel. You've only ever been half a man." Nobody laughed. That was the strange part. For all the cruelty in her voice, for all the years she had practiced slicing me open with beautiful sentences, the room did not give her what she wanted. There was only silence, thick and polished, spreading across the ballroom like spilled wine. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. Her nails were pale pink. Her diamond caught the chandelier light. 15 years earlier, I had put that ring on her finger in a little church outside Savannah while she cried and promised to love me in sickness, in loss, in disappointment, and in whatever life became when the applause ended. I remembered believing her. I remembered thinking a man could survive anything if the woman beside him still saw him whole. Across the room, my lawyer, Evelyn Brooks, sat alone at a round table near the windows. She was wearing a dark gray dress, pearls, and the calm expression of someone who had not come to celebrate. Madison had invited her because she thought tonight would be clean, public, controlled. She thought Evelyn was there to watch me accept the ending Madison had written for both of us. But when my wife called me half a man in front of everyone I knew, I did not answer. I did not defend myself. I did not correct the lie that had followed me for almost a decade. I only looked past Madison, toward Evelyn, and watched as she closed one hand over the black leather folder on the table. That was when I understood something Madison had forgotten. Silence does not always mean surrender. Sometimes silence is just a door waiting for the right person to open it. That was not the first time Madison had said something cruel to me. It was only the first time she said it with a microphone in the room, with waiters standing along the wall and relatives pretending not to hear. By then, our marriage had become a house where every beautiful room had a locked door behind it. From the outside, we looked polished, steady, respectable. We lived in a white two-story home south of Broad Street, with a blue front door, old brick steps, and a porch Madison filled with ferns she never watered herself. We donated to hospital fundraisers. We hosted Thanksgiving for both families. We sent Christmas cards with our names printed in gold. But inside that house, I had learned to measure the temperature of a room by the way Madison set down her coffee cup. A soft click meant she was annoyed. A hard one meant I had already done something wrong, even if I did not know what it was yet. In the early years, I told myself marriage had seasons. People changed under pressure. Businesses struggled. Doctors gave news nobody wanted. Dreams got delayed. I thought love meant absorbing the impact and not keeping score. When Madison cried in the bathroom after another appointment, I sat outside the door for hours and told her we could face anything together. When she stopped letting me come with her, I respected it. When she told her friends the problem was mine because it was easier than explaining private pain, I let the lie stand for one dinner, then 1 month, then 1 year. I thought I was protecting her. I did not understand that some people will use your mercy as raw material for a weapon. The story spread quietly at first. A look from her mother when babies were mentioned. A hand on my shoulder from a friend at church who said he was praying for me. A joke from one of Madison's cousins about how some men were better at business than building families. Madison never corrected them. She would lower her eyes, touch my arm, and let the room decide I had failed her in the most intimate way a husband could fail a wife. I took it because I loved her. Then I took it because I was embarrassed. Then I took it because silence had become a habit I could not break. By the time Brandon Cole entered our lives, Madison no longer needed to raise her voice to make me feel small. She had trained the room to do it for her. He arrived as a consultant for her boutique real estate firm, all bright teeth, expensive loafers, and confident opinions about money that was not his. The first time he came to our house, he parked his silver Range Rover in my spot without asking. Madison noticed. She smiled. I noticed that too. From that night on, something in our home shifted by inches. Brandon stayed later after meetings. Madison laughed louder at his stories. My seat at the kitchen island became his place to spread out contracts. Still, I said nothing, because Evelyn Brooks had already told me the hardest truth I had ever paid to hear. If I wanted the whole truth, I had to stop interrupting the lie. Brandon did not take my place all at once. He took it the way water takes a foundation, quietly, patiently, until one morning you look down and realize the ground under your feet has moved. At first, he was only at the office. Madison said he had a gift for strategy, that he understood the kind of expansion her firm needed if she wanted to compete with the larger agencies in Charleston and Mount Pleasant. I had helped build that firm when it was 3 desks, 1 printer, and Madison answering calls in the guest bedroom with a yellow legal pad on her knees. I had refinanced my parents' old house in Raleigh to cover her first payroll. I had driven through summer storms to meet lenders who would not take her seriously until my name was on the paperwork. But by the time Brandon came along, Madison spoke about the business as if it had risen from the floorboards by the force of her will alone. She began saying things like, Daniel was supportive in the beginning, the way people describe an old chair they have not thrown out because it still has sentimental value. Then Brandon started attending Sunday brunch. Then charity auctions. Then family dinners. He never did anything obvious enough for me to confront without looking insecure. He simply leaned back in my chair, reached for the coffee pot before I did, and answered questions Madison used to direct toward me. When my father asked about a waterfront listing near Sullivan's Island, Brandon cut in and said, Daniel does not really follow the high-end side anymore. Madison did not correct him. She laughed softly and said, he likes quieter things now. Quieter things. That became her public language for my supposed decline. If I did not argue, I was passive. If I asked a question, I was threatened. If I left the room, I was fragile. Brandon learned the script fast. One evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner because Madison said the housekeeper had already worked enough that week, he stood in my kitchen holding one of my glasses and called me the quiet husband. Everyone smiled like it was harmless. I remember rinsing a plate under warm water and watching soap slide over my wedding band. I could have turned around. I could have said that the quiet husband owned 40% of the company he was supposedly too simple to understand. I could have said that the quiet husband had already found the second set of financial statements Madison kept in a locked folder labeled vendor projections. I could have said Evelyn Brooks had 3 investigators tracing transfers that Brandon thought were buried behind consulting fees. But I had learned that people who underestimate you will often explain their entire plan if you let them feel safe. So I dried the plate, placed it in the cabinet, and listened. Brandon wanted Madison to open a second office in Charlotte. Madison wanted me to sign a restructuring agreement. They said it was routine. They said it would simplify ownership. They said it would protect me from liability, as if I were a child being walked away from a busy street. That was when I understood Brandon had not come to replace me in my marriage alone. He had come for everything my silence had helped build. By the time Madison planned the dinner, she had already decided the story everyone would believe. She chose a Thursday evening because, according to her, weekends made people too relaxed, and this was not a relaxed matter. She ordered sea bass from a restaurant on King Street, hired 2 servers, and had the dining room arranged as if it were a private board meeting disguised as family dinner. My father drove down from Raleigh in his old Cadillac. Madison's mother arrived wearing pearls and the concerned expression she saved for public embarrassment. Her sister came with her husband, who spent most of the evening checking stock prices on his phone. Brandon showed up last, of course, because men like him enjoy being noticed. He wore a navy sport coat with no tie, carried a bottle of California Cabernet, and greeted my wife with a hand at the small of her back that stayed there 1 second too long for a business consultant. Madison did not move away. She only glanced at me to see whether I had noticed. I had. I noticed everything by then. Evelyn Brooks arrived 10 minutes later in a black sedan, stepped onto our brick walkway, and walked in carrying the same leather folder I had seen in her office 2 weeks earlier. Madison kissed the air near her cheek and thanked her for coming, as though Evelyn were a clerk invited to witness paperwork. Evelyn simply said, "Of course," and took the seat I had asked her to take, directly across from Madison. Dinner began with polite conversation so thin it could barely cover what was underneath. Madison talked about the new Charlotte office as if it already existed. Brandon explained commercial lending to my father, who had spent 30 years as a bank manager and did not need the lesson. I kept my hands folded beside my plate and listened while my wife performed grief in perfect posture. She said marriage required honesty. She said there came a point when compassion became self-betrayal. She said she had spent years waiting for me to become the man she needed, and her voice trembled just enough to make her mother reach for a napkin. Then she slid a cream-colored envelope across the table. My name was written on it in her careful handwriting. Daniel. Not Honey. Not Dan. Not my husband. Just Daniel, as if I were a tenant receiving notice. "I think it is time," she said. "We should handle this with dignity." Brandon looked down, pretending the moment pained him. I opened the envelope and saw the separation agreement, the business restructuring form, and a page transferring voting control of my company's shares into a temporary management trust Madison would oversee. Temporary. That word almost made me smile. Madison leaned closer and lowered her voice, but not enough to keep the others from hearing. "Please do not make this harder than it has to be. You have already lost enough of yourself." I looked at the papers, then at the woman I had protected for years, and asked, "You want me to sign this tonight, in front of everyone?" Her face softened into something crueler than anger. "What exactly are you afraid of losing, Daniel? Your pride? You have been living without that for years." No one moved. Even Brandon stopped pretending to read his wine label. Evelyn's fingers rested on the edge of her folder, still and patient. Madison thought that was the moment she had won, because I picked up the pen beside the agreement. I held it for a few seconds, feeling the weight of every dinner where I had stayed quiet, every rumor I had swallowed, every insult I had allowed to pass through me, because I believed peace was worth the cost. Then I set the pen back down without signing. Madison's smile faded by a fraction. It was the first honest thing her face had done all night. Evelyn did not stand right away. That was what made the room feel colder. She let Madison sit with the small shock of being refused. Let Brandon look from the unsigned papers to my face. Let every person at that table understand that the quiet husband had just stepped outside the role assigned to him. Madison recovered first, because Madison always recovered in public. She placed both hands beside her plate, smiled without warmth, and said, "Daniel, please do not turn this into a scene." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because she had built the scene herself with candles, witnesses, legal papers, and a man who had been sitting in my chair for months. "I am not turning it into anything," I said. "I am just not signing." Her mother inhaled softly. My father looked at me with the same expression he had worn when I was 12 years old and finally admitted I hated Little League, but had kept playing because I thought he wanted me to. There was sadness in it, but there was relief too. Madison's eyes shifted toward Evelyn. "Is this your advice?" she asked. "Because if Mr. Whitaker wants to make this difficult, I can assure you, I am prepared." Evelyn finally opened her folder. The sound was barely louder than a breath, but everyone heard it. She removed one page, placed it on the table, and aligned it with the edge of her salad fork as if the angle mattered. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "before my client signs any document tonight, there are a few corrections that need to be made to the record." Brandon leaned back, but his confidence had lost its shine. Madison gave a polite little laugh. "The record? This is a family matter." Evelyn looked at her for the first time that evening. "You made it a business matter when you included a transfer of voting control in a separation agreement." The room went so still I could hear the air conditioner whisper through the ceiling vent. Madison's sister lowered her phone. Her husband stopped tapping his screen. I watched Madison's fingers press into the tablecloth. "That clause is temporary," she said. "It protects the company during a personal transition." Evelyn nodded once, as if Madison had answered a question correctly on an exam that was about to become much harder. "Then we should also discuss why the company needs protection from the person requesting control." Brandon set down his wine glass. Too quickly. The base clicked against the wood beneath the linen. Madison turned to him, just for half a second, but it was enough. Evelyn noticed. I had learned over the last year that Evelyn noticed the things people did when they thought the sentence was over. She reached into the folder again and removed a second document. "There is also the issue of the public statements made about my client's health, his role in this marriage, and the reason this family has no children." Madison's face changed. It was small, almost invisible to anyone who had not spent 15 years reading her expressions like weather. Her chin lifted. Her eyes hardened. The performance was gone. "That is private," she said. Evelyn's voice stayed level. "It was private when my client protected you. It stopped being private when you used it to humiliate him in front of his family, your business associate, and half of Charleston." No one looked at Madison then. They looked at me. For the first time in years, I was not the rumor in the room. I was the man waiting beside the truth. Madison swallowed and whispered, "Daniel, do not do this." And there it was, the first honest request she had made all night. Not because she was sorry, not because she loved me, but because she had finally realized the folder on Evelyn's side of the table was not there to end my life. It was there to open hers. Evelyn did not raise her voice when she said it. That made it worse for Madison, because there was no emotion to fight, no accusation to twist, no anger to call unstable. There was only a woman in a dark gray dress sliding a single sheet of paper across a dining table where the candles had burned low and the sea base had gone cold. "For 9 years, Evelyn said, Mrs. Whitaker allowed friends, relatives, and business associates to believe my client was the reason this marriage did not have children." Madison went pale in a way I had never seen before. Not embarrassed, not angry, exposed. Her mother looked at her, then at the paper, then back at her again, as if she were trying to read a language she suddenly feared she understood. My father did not touch the document. He just stared at me, and for the first time since the rumors began, I saw the question leave his face. Evelyn continued, "Mr. Whitaker underwent medical testing in Atlanta 8 years ago after repeated statements were made about his health and fertility. Those results were normal. He was advised there was no clinical basis for the claims being made about him." Madison's sister whispered, "Maddie?" Madison shut her eyes for 1 second too long. That was all the answer anyone needed. I remembered the day I got those results. I had driven 300 miles back from Atlanta in silence, the envelope on the passenger seat, my hands tight on the steering wheel as pine trees blurred past the highway. I had not felt relieved. I had felt ashamed for feeling relieved, because the truth did not fix the thing we had lost. It only told me the blame had been placed in the wrong hands. When I showed Madison, she cried so hard I thought grief might break her. She told me she could not bear people knowing. She said her mother would pity her, her friends would whisper, her clients would look at her differently. She asked me to protect her until she was ready. So I did. I protected her through baby showers where women touched her arm and said there was still hope. I protected her through holidays where relatives gave me sad smiles over pie and coffee. I protected her when she let people call me distant, damaged, incomplete. Every year, I told myself love sometimes meant carrying pain that did not belong to you. Evelyn placed another page beside the first. The second record shows that Mrs. Whitaker was informed of her own medical complications before my client was ever tested. Madison's mother covered her mouth with both hands. Brandon looked at Madison as if the math in his head had suddenly changed. He had believed her version too, or maybe he had only cared that the version made me smaller. Madison finally spoke, but her voice had lost its polish. "You had no right." Evelyn looked at her calmly. "My client had every right to correct a lie used to damage his reputation and pressure him into signing away property." Madison turned to me then, and for a moment the room disappeared. I saw the woman from the little church outside Savannah, the woman who once held my hand like it was the safest place in the world. Then I saw the woman at the head of my table, surrounded by papers she had prepared to take what was left of me. Daniel, she said, softer now. I was ashamed. I nodded because I believed that part. She had been ashamed. But shame was not the same as innocence. Shame did not explain the dinners, the jokes, the way she let men I respected look at me like I had failed a basic test of manhood. Shame did not explain Brandon in my chair or my signature line waiting under a transfer of control. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence again. There is more. Brandon's head turned sharply. Madison's face changed before anyone else understood why. The first truth had taken away her tragedy. The next one was about to take away her excuse. Evelyn placed the next set of documents on the table, and this time Brandon moved before Madison did. It was small, just a shift of his shoulders and a glance toward the hallway, but it told me everything. A man who is innocent asks what is happening. A man who knows exactly what is happening looks for the nearest exit. Evelyn did not look at him. She did not need to. Over the past 14 months, she said, Whitaker Coastal Properties paid $287,000 in consulting fees to 3 outside vendors. Madison's sister's husband sat forward for the first time all night. Money had a way of waking people who could sleep through pain. Evelyn slid one page toward him, then another toward my father. All 3 vendors were formed within 6 weeks of each other. All 3 listed mailing addresses connected to temporary office suites in North Charleston. And all 3 accounts transferred funds into an investment account controlled by Mr. Cole. Brandon gave a stiff laugh. That is completely misleading. Evelyn looked at him then, not sharply, not dramatically, just long enough to make his laugh collapse on itself. Then you will have the opportunity to explain it to the forensic accountant and, if necessary, to the court. Madison's face tightened. This is absurd. Brandon helped stabilize the company. No, Evelyn said. Mr. Whitaker stabilized the company when he guaranteed the original line of credit with his personal assets. Mr. Cole helped create a paper trail that moved company money away from the business while preparing a management trust that would have removed Mr. Whitaker's voting rights. My father closed his eyes. I knew what he was remembering. The house in Raleigh, the one with the cracked driveway and the maple tree my mother loved. I had signed against it so Madison could make payroll in the first year, and my father had never once asked when I would be paid back. He only said, "Make sure she is worth it." At the time, I thought she was. Madison reached for the wine glass in front of her, but stopped before touching it. Daniel knew about the restructuring, she said. He agreed in principle. Evelyn pulled out the document Madison had given me that night and tapped one paragraph with her index finger. He was told it was liability protection. He was not told it would give you sole authority to sell company assets, approve new debt, and transfer ownership interests without his consent. The room changed then. It was no longer a family dinner with an uncomfortable argument. It was a witness room. Everyone at that table understood they were hearing something that could not be unheard. Brandon tried to recover by turning to me. Daniel, come on. You know how business works. This is being twisted. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about his range. Rover in my parking spot, his contracts spread across my kitchen island, his voice explaining my own company to my own father. I know exactly how business works, I said. That is why I let you keep talking. Madison stared at me as if a portrait had stepped out of its frame. For years, she had mistaken restraint for ignorance. She had believed that because I did not interrupt, I did not understand. Evelyn opened the final section of her folder and removed copies of emails, bank confirmations, calendar invites, and internal notes printed in careful order. My client became aware of irregularities last winter, she said. Rather than confront them prematurely, he authorized my firm to document the pattern. Brandon's mouth opened, but no words came out. Madison whispered, "You watched us?" I shook my head. No. I finally stopped looking away. Outside, rain began to tap against the dining room windows, soft and steady, like the house itself had started counting down. For the first time since Brandon entered our lives, he was not leaning back in my chair. He was sitting perfectly still, hands flat on the table, while the quiet husband he had mocked became the only person in the room who had known how the night would end. Madison's first instinct was not to deny the papers. It was to perform for the room again, because performance had saved her for so many years that she trusted it more than truth. She pushed back from the table slowly, pressed one hand against her chest, and looked at her mother with wet eyes that arrived exactly when she needed them. I was scared, she said. I was trying to keep the company alive. I was trying to keep this family from collapsing. Years earlier, that sentence would have moved me. I would have stood up, crossed the room, and taken the blame from her hands before anyone else could see it. That was the part of me she had counted on. The husband who apologized when she cried. The man who believed every wound required his forgiveness. But I stayed seated. Across from me, Evelyn removed one last envelope from the folder and laid it flat beside Madison's untouched separation agreement. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "fear does not create shell vendors. Fear does not draft ownership transfers. Fear does not instruct a consultant to delay disclosure until after a spouse signs under social pressure." Brandon's face changed at the word instruct. Madison saw it too. For the first time all night, her eyes left me and went to him with something close to panic. He looked away. It was a small betrayal compared with everything else, but it landed harder because it was public. The man she had allowed into my seat would not even meet her eyes when the chair started burning beneath him. Evelyn slid a printed email into the center of the table. This message was sent from Mrs. Whitaker to Mr. Cole 6 weeks ago. It refers to tonight's dinner as the cleanest way to get Daniel to sign because, and I quote, "he will not embarrass me in front of family." She stopped there. She did not need to read more. The sentence did what evidence does when it is strong enough. It ended the argument without asking permission. Madison's sister stood and walked to the sideboard, not to leave, just to put distance between herself and the woman at the head of the table. My father took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief, though they were not dirty. Madison's mother whispered, "You planned this?" Madison turned toward her. "Mom, you do not understand what it has been like." "No," her mother said, and her voice was smaller than I expected. "I do not think I do." Brandon finally spoke, but not to defend Madison. I was acting under the information provided to me. It was polished, careful, the kind of sentence a man says when he is already imagining a lawyer of his own. Madison looked at him as if he had slapped a signature across her forehead. "Brandon," she said. He did not answer. In that silence, the story Madison had built began to fall apart in the exact order she had built it. First the grieving wife, then the misunderstood businesswoman, then the loyal partner with a stronger man beside her. One by one, each mask slid off and landed on the white tablecloth among the cold plates and folded napkins. Evelyn turned the envelope toward me. "Mr. Whitaker has prepared a separate filing," she said. "It preserves his ownership interest, requests a full accounting of company funds, freezes disputed transfers pending review, and rejects the proposed management trust in full." Madison's hand trembled near her glass, but she did not pick it up. "You would ruin me?" she asked. I looked at the woman I had loved, the woman I had protected, the woman who had turned my protection into proof of weakness. "No," I said. "I am just done paying for the version of you that only exists when people are watching." The rain tapped harder against the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, one of the servers quietly closed the kitchen door. No one at the table told me I was being cruel. No one told me to calm down. No one asked me to sign anything. For the first time in that house, Madison had the whole room looking at her, and not one person was waiting for her next performance. The dinner did not end with shouting. It ended with paper. That surprised me more than anything. After all the years of tension, all the careful insults, all the rooms where I had been turned into a punchline without ever raising my voice, I thought the final moment would feel louder. Instead, it was quiet. Evelyn gathered the documents into neat stacks and left copies of each filing on the table. Madison sat motionless at the head of the dining room, her face pale under the chandelier light, while Brandon took out his phone and stepped into the hallway to make a call he clearly did not want anyone to hear. My father stood and came around the table, not to give a speech, not to say he had known all along, but simply to place one hand on my shoulder. It was the first time in years that touch did not feel like pity. Madison's mother looked smaller than she had when she arrived. She walked to her daughter, then stopped halfway, as if love and disappointment had met in the middle of the room and neither one knew where to go. I signed nothing Madison had prepared. The paper she had slid toward me stayed there, untouched, beside the cold dinner plates and the wine no one wanted anymore. What I did sign, 2 days later in Evelyn's office, was my own petition for divorce, a request for a full accounting of Whitaker Coastal Properties, and an order that kept my shares exactly where they belonged until a judge could review everything. The following weeks were not dramatic in the way people imagine. There were no grand speeches on courthouse steps, no sudden apologies that fixed 15 years, no perfect justice wrapped in a bow. There were emails, meetings, accountants, lawyers, bank statements printed in thick folders. Brandon resigned from his consulting role before the review was complete, claiming he wanted to avoid distracting from the company's future. Nobody believed him, but by then belief no longer mattered as much as documentation. Madison tried to rebuild her image, first as a woman betrayed by bad advice, then as a wife pushed too far by a cold husband, then as a business owner under impossible pressure. Each version lasted until the next document contradicted it. In the end, she did not lose everything, because life is rarely that clean. But she lost the company control she had tried to take, lost the room that once echoed whatever story she told, and lost the one thing she had never thought I would withdraw: my silence in service of her reputation. I moved out of the house south of Broad Street on a gray Saturday morning, while rainwater ran along the curb and soaked the cardboard boxes before I could get them into the truck. I took my clothes, my father's old watch, 2 framed photographs of places that still felt honest, and the small wooden cross from the church outside Savannah. I left the porch ferns, the blue front door, the dining table, and every version of myself that had stayed too long because he thought endurance was the same as love. Madison stood in the doorway when I carried out the last box. She looked tired, not victorious, not broken, just human in a way I had not seen in years. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. I set the box down for a moment and looked at the woman I had once promised forever to. "Yes," I said. That was the problem. I kept confusing love with permission. Then I walked to the truck, closed the tailgate, and drove north until the house disappeared from the rearview mirror. Months later, people still asked why I had waited so long to speak. I never knew how to answer in a way that sounded simple, because silence can be fear, loyalty, shame, strategy, or all of them wearing the same face. What I know is this: Madison thought my silence meant there was nothing left of me to defend. But silence was never emptiness. It was a vault. And when the right voice finally opened it, the truth did not need to shout.